And action. All right, Brave Nation, this is Ask Anthony, 3 to 5 minutes. Ramo's got a question. Let's go. What do you got?
Okay, Anthony, I meant to ask you, how can I lose weight but without losing muscle mass?
Okay, the question is, how can you lose weight without losing muscle mass? All right, so it depends on where you're at. So the first things first is, I'm gonna talk to the camera, but I'm actually talking to Ramo. All right, so first things first is, we gotta make sure that we're in a caloric deficit to lose weight, right? Now here's the thing, if we go in too much of a caloric deficit, we're probably gonna lose some muscle mass in the process. So the caloric deficit that we would wanna be in would be very, very small. Right? So maybe anywhere between like 250 to 300 calories, right? So not much. Then on top of that, the next thing we need to do is we want to make sure that we're getting adequate amount of protein and maybe even a little bit more protein than your average bear. So anywhere between between 0.8 and 1.2 grams is usually the recommendation per pound of body weight. So maybe you would go like 1 to 1.2 grams, and then you would factor in your macros to take a bunch of calories up just with protein to make sure you're getting the adequate amount of protein, and then making sure that you're timing it right. So you're getting protein in the morning, protein in the afternoon, protein after your workout, protein in the evening. So you're constantly having this protein for your body to utilize to create more lean muscle mass so that you can also lose weight, lose body fat, but keep muscle mass at the same time.
All right.
Is that good?
It's great.
Any other follow-up questions?
Is it realistic to lose like a pound per week?
Is it realistic to lose a pound per week? That's really gonna depend on you and then how much you're working out, and then also the style of training you're working out. If your workouts consist of just walking or something very, very low intensity, it's gonna be a lot harder to lose weight. But if we're doing things like lifting heavy weights, doing high intensity metabolic conditioning, like in CrossFit, all right, you're gonna have a propensity to lose more body fat than you would, or lose more weight, I should say, than you would if you were doing something a lot less intense.
Gotcha.
Any other ones?
Thank you. That's it.
Cool. We'll see ya. Hey guys, it's Coach Anthony with your 3 to 5, and here is Ramo. He's got another question for us.
Okay, so how can I introduce someone to CrossFit without scaring them off?
That's a good question. How can I introduce somebody to CrossFit without scaring them off? All right. This is probably the thing I get most fired up about, so I'm gonna try to answer it within 3 to 5 minutes. All right, here's the thing. So remember, we start with this idea that every human being is either trained or untrained, right? And when we looked back at history and human development, as far as like physical fitness goes, really like, especially through the 70s, 80s, 90s, what you had was like bodybuilding, where people isolated certain muscle groups and they worked that muscle group until it was exhausted, hoping that it would grow and it would just get bigger. But then what we found is there was a lot of, most people didn't know how to do it correctly. They didn't understand how to balance certain muscle groups. They would only focus on like their upper body, and then they'd have these tiny little legs, right? And then overuse injuries and all these different things. So, and then also practical application, like when they started to try to do things in real life, like say in the military, you know, we had these big old biceps we couldn't fit in our cami sleeves, but then we'd like try to go pick somebody up, and all of a sudden guys were like throwing their back out and stuff. So the ways we were training weren't actually working for everyday life. So in comes CrossFit. So what it did is it showed people how to train to be the most effective and capable human being that you can be across everything. It doesn't matter if it's swimming or climbing ropes or running it through the mountains or lifting heavy weight out of the ground or putting heavy weight over your head or walking on your hands. CrossFitters are gonna be generally physically prepared for anything that comes their way. So the way you can talk to people about it is you can just get them fired up of saying like, hey, this is for human beings. Like every human being was created to move and to be able to be capable like this, right? And all CrossFit did was basically show us like a more fun way to do it, right? So what we do is constantly varied functional movements at high intensity. Those constantly vary. We vary the routine so that our bodies never adapt. So we're continually getting better. And I've been doing CrossFit for 11 years, and I'm still getting PRs on certain workouts, and I'm still getting better at certain movements. So constantly varied. Then the functional movement. What does that mean? It means movements that you see in everyday life. Human beings squat down and they pick things up and they push things over their head. If you don't train for that, eventually you're not gonna be capable of doing that. And this is usually what we see in our older population. It's just been so long since they've bent over and picked up something heavy. The first time they try to go down to do that, maybe they go to pick up some grandkids and then they throw their back out because their bodies aren't prepared for it because they're not training for it. So we wanna train for those functional movements, right? And then the high intensity. Now this is where people get it the most wrong, right? They get so worried about seeing people in a gym going really fast and lifting really heavy weight. And remember, intensity is relative to the individual. If you've never run a mile, running a mile is a really, really intense thing. So you'd probably want to break it down to maybe just jogging and not trying to run as fast as you can, or maybe even breaking that mile up into smaller segments and just maybe running a minute and then walking a minute and running a minute and walking a minute, something like that. Because again, intensity is relative to the individual. So what is super intense for me or what is super intense for Ramo is not appropriate for somebody who's just a beginner. But that doesn't mean that the beginner shouldn't push themselves to what feels like intensity to them. And what we see is when you push your body to do something intense, thinking about like 70 to 80% effort to where it feels uncomfortable, what you see is great adaptation from that. You see that people get really, really strong, they get really, really fit, and they get really, really fast. Doesn't mean that you have to throw up after workouts, and it doesn't even mean that you have to fall down on the floor after workouts, right? It just means that you need to push yourself to be a little uncomfortable, to strain yourself just a little bit so that your body goes, oh shoot, this dude's trying to get stronger. We need to be able to lift more weight. Let's make these muscles grow. Cool?
Thank you.
All right. Guys, that was 3 to 5 minutes. Thanks, Ramo.
Thank you.
Yeah, later.